After I had a first look at the Bigme Galy a couple of weeks ago, it's finally time for the full review. This is the very first real color ink tablet with EInk Gallery 3 screen technology. I say real because this one is using colored ink particles, which have some notable advantages over EInk Kaleido 3 screen technology, which is only using an RGB layer on top of a regular black and white ink screen. More on that in a second. But there's also a reason why this is still the only Gallery 3 tablet at the time of recording this review. And besides that, there are a couple of points that you also need to know if you're thinking about getting one. Even though this review will be a bit more on the negative side than usual, please don't mistake it for bashing or intentionally bad-mouthing the device. There are just a couple of things that need to be addressed, and I hope Bigme will do so in the future because the basics are generally pretty interesting. Okay, enough of that, let's check it out. When first getting the Bigme Galy out of the box, I was pleasantly surprised at the great build quality and haptics. The tablet feels solid and lies very well in the hand thanks to the grip area on the side of the display. Frame and back are made of plastic, but it's not especially lightweight. With 316 grams, it's on the upper end in that size segment. With the pen, the weight climbs to 334 grams, and everything combined with the cover weighs 476 grams. The matte screen is flush with the bezel, but not as scratch resistant as the latest Onyx Boox devices. So it makes sense to use the included cover for protection. The cover itself is pretty nice with this magnetic flap that helps covering the pen. It also has a sleep function, so the Bigme Galy wakes up when opening the cover. The only thing I personally am not a big fan of is the good e-reader logo on the back. I think having one brand on the cover is more than enough. But on the bright side, the device itself is more or less brand free, so there's that. Specs wise, the Bigme Galy is fully loaded. It has an octa-core CPU with 6 gigs of RAM and 128 gigs of expandable storage. There are also dual speakers, 4 microphones and 2 cameras, one on the front and one on the back. Personally, I don't see the point of cameras on an EInk device, to be honest, because the ink screen makes handling them too cumbersome, even for something simple as document scanning. But at the least, they are not protruding as they do on the Boox Tab Ultra devices. So you can put the Bigme Galy down on the desk without wobbling. Call me old-fashioned or even paranoid, but I also don't like having cameras in both directions on an EInk tablet for privacy reasons. Especially since the Galy doesn't have the latest Android security patches, but in all fairness, other Android EInk devices also don't have them. But most also don't have 2 cameras. There's also a pen included in the box for note-taking, more on that later. First, let's talk about the display. It's an 8-inch EInk Gallery 3 display with a resolution of 300 ppi. Gallery 3 is the name of the display technology, which is the first one that brings colored ink particles in a tablet or e-reader. So instead of just having black and white particles, EInk Gallery 3 is using 4 different particle colors: cyan, magenta, yellow, and white. By mixing those particles, the screen can create pretty much any color. It basically works how colors are created in the print industry. What's great about this approach is that the screen isn't so incredibly dark compared to EInk Kaleido. Kaleido is the other EInk color technology, which works with an additional RGB layer on top of the EInk screen. That additional layer darkens the overall appearance of the screen. That's not the case with the Bigme Galy. Using it without the frontlight is absolutely doable. It's still a tiny bit darker than the latest EInk Kaleido 1200 screens, but not by much. And of course, you can also use the frontlight to improve readability. And that frontlight is actually pretty nice. There isn't a noticeable brightness gradient visible, only some subtle halos on the side of the grip, and only when using the warm colored LEDs. Nothing drastic, but it can be noticeable depending on the light setting and how sensitive you are to such things. Contrast levels are also quite good when using the front light. But what's especially great about EInk Gallery 3 is the higher resolution of 300 ppi for both black and white content and colored content. Even though I found the 150 ppi Kaleido 3 screens to be good enough, you can definitely tell the difference. Color saturation generally is okay, but there is a slight red tint to the screen which I personally can live with. But what's definitely a problem is the poor rendition of the color green. That's something people started to point out when the first videos and pictures of the Galy popped up, and it's unfortunately still an issue today. Looking at it side by side with Kaleido 3, you can see there's a very obvious difference. You can tell that it's green, but it's simply not as saturated as it should be. There are two different display modes for color rendition, HD and Extreme, but Extreme should not be mistaken for something like the ultra-fast display mode of Onyx Boox devices. It's simply a quicker refresh without the double flicker of the HD mode. So it's not meant to be used for more dynamic apps or videos, but simply for faster page turns. Speaking of flickering, that got much better with the last firmware update. Initially, it seemed to be very inconsistent and much slower than what I'm seeing now. It's still a double flicker, but generally quicker than before. Using it is obviously still an adjustment, but to be honest, and that might sound strange, I got used to it. Maybe because I've used black and white ink screens 15 years ago and those behaved not too differently. The quicker display mode is more digestible though. However, color saturation and ghosting are both worse in that mode. Especially the color blue is much less saturated with the extreme mode. So even though the flicker in HD mode can be a bit annoying and draws more energy, more on that in a bit, I was using it more. The Bigme Galy uses Android 11 with a customized user interface. Although it looks like the Onyx Boox UI in a few aspects, there are many differences. The very first thing you'll notice is that it doesn't look as refined. It's especially obvious with the icons, which have these small imperfections in the corners. My best guess is they scaled the UI down a bit from a larger screen, resulting in these rendering issues. It doesn't impair usability, but it certainly doesn't look very polished. What I find more annoying about it is the fact that I can't switch to another launcher. You can define something like the simple ink launcher to be the default one, which would allow me to circumvent the Bigme launcher's render quality, but the device still always returns to the Bigme launcher when tapping the home icon. So you're basically stuck with that one at the moment. As I mentioned, the Bigme Galy comes with a Wacom pen. That one is a bit different than your typical EInk tablet pen because even though it uses Wacom technology, it's an active pen. Active meaning that it has a battery and needs to be charged to make use of the additional functions. It's basically a Bluetooth remote that you can use to control a tablet. And there's also, for some reason, a Laserpointer integrated at the end of the pen. The pen is connected to the tablet via Bluetooth, and the active functions even work when Bluetooth on the Galy is disabled or the device is in airplane mode. While that's convenient, I feel like that shouldn't be the case, to be honest. The pen is charged through these two pogo pins on the side and held in place magnetically. So that's not the prettiest solution I've seen, but works reliably regardless. Writing with it even works if the battery is empty. You can also use other Wacom styluses if you don't like the somewhat unique coding of the pen. Same as most other EInk Wacom tablets, the Bigme Galy supports 4096 pressure levels. You can use colors for note-taking, and depending on which color you use, the color will drag a little behind the actual line. The line itself is black at first and changes to the chosen color a tiny bit later. That's a bit unusual to see, but actually works well. The pen latency is also pretty good in general, around 20 milliseconds when just measuring the immediate response without taking the color change into account. So writing with it feels good in general, but depending on the color can be a bit less natural as when simply using black lines. The Notetaking app has a couple of different functions like different pen types, templates, shapes, and an OCR function that only works when connected to the internet. Same as with the rest of the UI, all of it works but isn't as refined as you'd expect from a device at this price point. The page templates being the most obvious example. When using simple horizontal lines as a background, they are rendered inconsistently. Some are thicker, some are thinner, it's a bit of a mess. I suspect it's the same issue as with the icons in the home screen. And those templates having been created for a larger screen and simply having been scaled down without properly optimizing them for the smaller screen size. Notes can be exported to PDF and PNG files. The integrated reading app offers the most important functions like the ability to change the text styling, creating annotations, or looking up words in the dictionary. It's quite similar to the approach Onyx Boox is taking, which is good and bad. It's good because it has the most important features you'd expect it to have. However, it's also not exactly self-explanatory and it takes some time getting used to it after tapping a few icons to understand what they are doing. There are some PDF viewing modes available, but those are pretty basic in general. You can take handwritten notes directly on the PDF page without the need to do any file conversions beforehand. And those annotations are saved directly in that very same PDF file. So when you're done, you can copy it back to your computer and have your highlights in that PDF file. There's also an option to export pages as PNGs, but at least in my testing, there was some quality/resolution degradation going on, making that not a viable option for me personally. You can also open other files like CBR that you typically use for comics or mangas. However, the viewing options are very limited with those. Pinch to zoom and moving the page around on the screen works, but that's basically it. So I'd recommend using something else for those files. When I first got the Bigme Galy, battery life was atrocious. Even without doing anything and just leaving it on standby, the battery would drain within 2 days or so. It took a couple of weeks for Bigme to release a new update, which thankfully fixed that dreadful battery drain. But even with that fix, it still has issues. I typically observed a drain of roughly 15% per 24 hours in standby, which also isn't great to begin with. What's worse, though, is that it randomly still drains the battery even more sometimes. Putting it to sleep with 50% and waking up to an empty battery happened more than once with my device. And things aren't especially looking good with using it actively either. Reading comics in HD mode, I've seen battery level drops of 5% per 10 minutes. That's roughly 3.5 hours of reading overall, which is also a pretty low number. Even most LCD tablets last much, much longer than this. For example, an iPad mini usually lasts around 10 hours or so when surfing the web or watching videos, but you can also get a bit more out of the Galy if you switch to the faster refresh mode or with less image-rich content. It's not life-altering, but at the least it is a bit better. Okay, so this is it. In the end, the Bigme Galy is definitely an interesting device, but as far as I'm concerned, only for a very selected group of people. If you're the type of person who can't wait to try new tech, are willing to pay extra and also to compromise for being one of the first one to use it, the Galy is certainly a cool gadget with a novelty factor. I personally was really excited to try EInk Gallery 3, and I'm glad there's a company that puts the technology out there. But it comes at a cost in a couple of ways. There's the actual cost for the tablet, which is more expensive than what I felt comfortable in spending if I wasn't getting it for this review. Right now, it's close to $700 US. That's a lot of money. You can get an iPad mini, including an Apple Pencil, and the official Smart Folio for pretty much the same price. I'm the last person to suggest an LCD is the better choice over an e-ink screen. But there's a pretty obvious mismatch in terms of value for money here, and it's not in favor of the Bigme Galy. While I do love the fact that I can get my hands on this early version of real color ink and also like the build quality of the device, there are too many compromises in my eyes. The most notable being the poor green color rendition, the slow screen refresh, the sometimes sluggish UI, and the underwhelming battery life. After having used the Bigme Galy, I have no doubt that color ink will change the landscape of ink devices. But not just yet. Even for hardcore ink fans, even though not all is bad, and I really don't want to bash anyone's work because I'm certain Bigme is working hard on improving the device, it's a really tough sell right now, and I personally simply can't recommend it at the moment. If you really want to use color ink, you should check out these two reviews right here and have a closer look at different Kaleido 3 devices, which simply offer a better overall experience for a lower price. I'll also take a closer look at these two Kaleido 3 devices from Bigme as well. So like and subscribe to not miss those, and if you found this review helpful. Thanks for your time watching and see you in the next one.